Hey everybody, and welcome to Wire Talk. I am so glad that you found us on YouTube. And today, and for the month of December, we're going to have a 3-part series on the faithfulness of God. We're going to look at the faithfulness of God the first week, the trustworthiness of God, and then that God is love on the third week. And I cannot wait to dive into this study. Okay, let's get started. Hey everybody, and welcome to Wire Talk. I'm Karen Stubbs, and I'm going to be hosting Wire Talk this month. My sidekick, Emily Korosik, is not with me because I'm giving her the month off and letting her enjoy her family. And I just want to do a little Bible study with you guys for the month of December. Because you know what? I know that the month of December is crazy for us moms. And it's hard to have our quiet time, and it's hard to just spend time with the Lord. But yet this is such a busy month that I didn't want it to go by without us really diving into it. It's such a great month because December is the month that we celebrate the birth of Jesus. And I don't know if y'all remember, but back in March, I went to Israel with my church, and I am so glad that I did. And we started around the Sea of Galilee, and we toured all those places around there. We went to Mount Carmel. Sorry. We went to Mount Carmel with that we saw where Elijah called down the fire onto the altar. We looked out over the valley where David killed Goliath. I mean, we saw so many great and amazing things. I saw the area where Paul was in prison for 2 years before he went to Rome in Caesarea Philippi, and it was just amazing. But our tour guide on this trip was a Messianic Jew. And what that means is he was born a Jew, but then whenever he was older, in his late 20s, he actually found the Lord, and he realized that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. You know, the Jews are God's chosen people, and they are looking for, to this day, the Messiah to come because it was prophesied in the Old Testament over and over and over again. God kept telling them over and over, I'm going to send you a Messiah. He's going to rescue you. He's going to be a king. He's going to rule. He's going to be from the family line of David, and he's going to rule forever. And under him, he's going to be the Prince of Peace. And he goes on and on and on throughout the Old Testament. Hundreds of years of prophecy before Jesus was born. And it actually goes all the way back to Genesis. That's the first whenever God tells Abram, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And from you, great things are going to happen. Jesus is going to come out of your line. So when I was in Israel, there were so many times that our tour guide, Zahar, who was a Messianic Jew, would tell us about the Old Testament prophecies. And then he would say, and this is where it was fulfilled, and this is how it was fulfilled. And it was just so cool. And what I came away with from that trip, more than anything, even walking the streets where Jesus walked and going down the road of to the cross and all of that, I was just floored by how faithful God is. And not only how faithful God is, but the reason I was realizing that he was so faithful is because Zahar, our tour guide, knew the Old Testament so clearly because he was a Jew by birth and he had studied it as a child, and he knew these prophecies. And then he was telling us, and this is how it was fulfilled, and this is how it was fulfilled. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. And I, Karen, need to be studying my Bible more. I need to be realizing and digging in and confirming for myself and realizing how faithful God is, because that helps me in my journey in motherhood. It helps me in my journey as a wife. It helps me in my just being a person. It just makes me a better Christian, because once you realize how faithful God is and how he's not going to turn his back on you and he's not going to leave you, it really does give you peace. You know, this past few weeks, I've had a few medical things that I had to go in and have some testing, and everything's fine. But the whole time I was having these tests, I just kept reminding myself, God is with me. He will not forsake me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. And as I was sitting there having these tests, I just kept reminding myself, Karen, you're not alone. I know you feel alone right now. I know Greg is out of town and you're in this hospital right now and you're having this test by yourself, but you are not alone. God is with you. And moms, it's so important that we realize that this month of December more than any other month, because more than any other month, God shows us his faithfulness in the birth of his son, Jesus. But as December approaches, this is the first week in December we're doing this podcast. You and I both know this is a crazy month, right? We have so much to do. We have the shopping. We have to get the presents. We got family coming in town, or we have to travel. We are cooking. We are going to the grocery store, making our list, going back because we forgot a bazillion things. We are decorating our house. We're going to end of the year school parties. We're going to Christmas parties for work, Christmas parties for your husband's work. I mean, it's one thing after another. And if you're like me, Christmas can just become background noise. It's like I hear the old songs, Oh Holy Night, Silent Night, Away in a Manger, all those things. And they're beautiful and I love them. But I don't really have time to sit and think about, that song, Mary, Did You Know? Did you know that you were holding God's son? I mean, that song alone always just brings chills up my spine. But that's what I want us to do during these next 3 weeks of Wire Talk. I want us to just pause a minute. Let's just take a minute and let's just take in of what God has for us to learn this week. And this week, we're going to focus on the faithfulness of God. And I think it's so important that we focus on the faithfulness of God because in our chaotic month of December and in our chaotic world that we live in, it is easy to forget that God is in control. We can look at the news and see everything spiraling out of control all over the world, especially in Israel. And we can get fearful and we can just be like, what's going to happen? And oh no, we had a relative call the house the other night and she wanted to talk to Greg. She's an elderly lady and she wanted Greg to reassure her, like, tell me about these world events and what's going on and how can that bring me peace? And you know what? Greg's final answer was, you know what? You've got to look to the Lord and trust him because he has a plan. And that's what I want to go to today. So I want to dive into the birth of Jesus because Jesus's life and birth and all the details that went with it were prophesied 45 times in the Old Testament. That's a lot. And just the fact that one person would maybe fulfill one of these prophecies in this book, I'm glad you asked. It says in the footnotes, the probability of only one marked prophecy accidentally fulfilled in any one person is 1 in 10 to the 17th power. Now, guys, that's a big number. 1 in 10 to the 17th power. My small group leader right now, Marcus Craig, is taking us through the Bible literacy class that he's doing, and it's so good. But he talked about this one fact. And he said, if you took a silver dollar and you stacked them up 2 feet high and you placed them all across the state of Texas and you marked one silver dollar, that's what 10 to the 17th power would look like. And then that you or I came along and we found that one marked silver dollar. That is the probability of all of these scriptures, these prophecies coming true. That's incredible when you think about that. But not only did God fulfill one, he fulfilled every single one. I remember when we were on the Mount of Olives and we were looking down into Jerusalem on our Israel trip. And Zahar, our tour guide, said, Jesus, this is where he walked down the Mount of Olives on the donkey. And he said, why do y'all think that's so important? He didn't say y'all. I just said y'all. Why do you think that's so important that he was on a donkey? And we were all just standing there because you know what? We didn't know that the scriptures of the Old Testament said that he will ride in on a donkey, that the king will ride in on a donkey into Jerusalem. Isn't that cool? But that's what Jesus did. He told his disciples, go get the donkey, bring him back to me, and I'm going to ride into Jerusalem on this donkey to fulfill the prophecy. All right, well, let's look at some of these prophecies about his birth, because that's what we're talking about, is the birth of Jesus. So in Isaiah 7:14, it says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Immanuel. And if we look over in Luke, we can see that the virgin, that whole thing that was in Luke 1:26. In the 6th month, God sent an angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. He says, you will be with child and will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end. Isn't that so cool? Then in Isaiah 9:6-7, it says, For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatest of his government, in peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. That's also fulfilled whenever he talks about there that we just read in Luke. It's all throughout. Another one is about Jeremiah 23:5. For the time is coming, says the Lord, when I will raise up a righteous descendant from King David's line. And we've already read that in Luke, but let's also look at it in Matthew. And I want to point out Matthew in particular, because Matthew he was a Jew. He was one of the disciples, but he wanted to convince the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah, because the Jews knew the Messiah was going to be coming, and they just didn't connect the dots. You know why? Because they didn't connect the dots because it didn't happen the way they thought it would happen. They were envisioning a king coming, like, Caesar. Like, that was the kind of kings that they knew. And so that's what they were envisioning, a king like David that had a throne, that had a palace that they could look to, and that was going to bring peace. And the way they thought the peace was going to look like is this king was going to break this rule of the Romans over them, this powerful government of Rome that had been just, really oppressing the Jews in Israel. And they thought this king was going to come and break that. And that it didn't come that way. Jesus came in a baby form and to a virgin, and he was God, but yet born to a Virgin Mary. And, it's just like, it makes sense to us because we know how the story goes, but back then it didn't. So Matthew starts in his, book of the Bible, he starts with the genealogy of Jesus. And why does he do that? Because he's showing the Jews, you guys know the importance of genealogy in our race. This is so important because I'm going to show you how Jesus is connected. He's trying to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. And in the notes of my study Bible, it says, presenting this record of ancestors, the genealogy, was one of the most interesting ways that Matthew could begin a book for the Jewish audience, because a person's family line proved his or her standing as one of God's chosen people. Matthew began by showing that Jesus was a descendant of Abraham, the father of all Jews, and direct descendant of David, fulfilling Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah's line. The facts of this ancestry were carefully preserved. This is the first of many proofs recorded in Matthew to show that Jesus is the true Messiah. All of the disciples that wrote one of the Gospels, they all had a reason for why they wrote what they wrote. And Matthew's whole desire was to get the Jewish people to realize, hey, your Messiah has come. He's already been born. We actually killed him, and then he rose from the grave after 3 days. That's what his whole point of it was. But so he starts off in Matthew 1, and he goes through, Abraham was the father of Isaac. I'm not going to read all this because y'all don't have time for that. But he goes down, and then he says David was the father of Solomon, and then he keeps going. And then he says after the exile to Babylon, he keeps going. And then he says, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. This is interesting. There were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile of Babylon, and 14 from the exile to Christ. Even in that one fact is you just see the precision of God. And I just want to close this with this. There's so many times in our lives that we think this doesn't add up. This is chaotic. Our world is going out of control. Nobody seems like they're in charge. God definitely doesn't even seem like he's paying attention or he's knowing what's going on. Those are all lies. The world is crazy. That's not a lie. But it's a lie that God doesn't know what he's doing and he's not paying attention. He's very much paying attention. And we are all marching towards the second coming of Christ. It's prophesied in the Bible. He talks about it a lot in the Bible that Christ is going to come again. And when he is, all the tears are going to be wiped away. There's going to be no more sickness, no more sadness, no more death, no more evil. Satan will finally be put away. And so that's what I want us to just remember this month of December. God is a God of faithfulness. And even when it feels like things are chaotic, maybe it's chaotic in your life. Like you're not even looking at the world news. You're like, I can't look at the world news. I'm so caught up in my life and what my toddlers are doing or what my children in elementary school or teenagers are doing. Or I'm an older mom like me and my grandkids, they're just, going out of control here. And you're just like, I'm so focused on that. Well, just know that you serve a faithful God and he is not going to leave you. He is not going to forsake you. That's another one of his promises. He's right there with you. And in this month of December, when it starts to get crazy in your world, in your little world, your social world and all of that, the finances and all of that, just remind yourself, take a deep breath and just say, God is a faithful God and I can trust that. If I don't trust anything else, I can trust that. And he's trustworthy. I'm also going to put these notes of all these predictions, these prophecies in the show notes so y'all can look them up. You can read them. And it's got the prediction and then it's got the fulfillment. And it's so cool just to do that. Like that could be an exercise throughout the month of December. Just read a few a day and then flip over to the New Testament and see where it was fulfilled. I'm telling you, it will change your walk. I promise. All right, until next week. And next week, we're going to talk about the trustworthiness of God. God is a trustworthy God. All right, until then, have a great week.